For centuries, people have whispered about Catholic saints who felt no pain, saints whose skin was pierced, burned, or torn, who simply did not flinch. Most people land on one of two assumptions. Either it never really happened, just pious legend dressed up over the years, or if it did happen, modern brain science has already explained it away as a chemical trick of the mind. But here is what I want you to sit with today. The deepest Catholic answer is not that these saints escaped their bodies, it is the opposite. Their pain went quiet because their souls were so completely absorbed in the love of God that grace overflowed into their flesh. Science can explain the silence, it cannot explain the wounds. And the gap between those two things is exactly where this story gets strange and far more beautiful than either side expects. So stay with me, because the real reason is not what the skeptics say, and it is not what the legends say either. It is something deeper than both. Let's name the real question first. When a saint in deep prayer feels nothing at all or carries open wounds for 50 years that stubbornly resist infection, what are we actually looking at? Is it a miracle? Is it a malfunction of the body? Or could it somehow be both at once? Think of it like this. Imagine a mother who runs into a burning house to save her child. She grabs the child, gets out, and only later notices the burns on her own arms. In that moment, she felt almost nothing because every ounce of her attention was poured out in love. Now stretch that to its limit. Imagine a love for God so total that the body itself goes quiet in the very same way. Why does this matter for you? Because how you answer it shapes how you see your own suffering and whether you believe faith and science are enemies or two witnesses to the same truth. If the skeptics are right, holiness is just neurology and pain is only a problem to be drugged away. If the saints are right, your pain might actually mean something and even be offered for someone you love. If you're interested in deepening your faith, hit like and tell me where you're watching from. Consider subscribing to stay rooted in Catholic truth. Support our videos, team, and tools. The link is in the description or scan the QR code on screen. But where does this teaching actually come from? It begins with St. Paul. At the very end of his letter to the Galatians, in chapter 6, verse 17, he writes a startling line. He says he bears on his body the marks of Jesus. The word he uses in Greek is stigmata, meaning the brand once burned into the skin of a slave to show who he belonged to. So Paul is saying, in effect, my scars prove whose I am. The wounds are not trophies. They are a sign of belonging. Now hold that next to a scene from the year 1224 on a mountain called La Verna. There, Saint Francis of Assisi became the first historically documented person in Christian history to receive the wounds of Christ in his own hands, feet, and side. What Paul named Francis carried. The marks of Jesus, prefigured in Paul's words, were fulfilled in Francis's flesh. This is the pattern Catholics call type and antitype. Christ's 5 wounds on the cross are the type. The wounds of the saints are the antitype, the living echo that points back to the original. Saint Bonaventure, who wrote the major life of Saint Francis, understood those wounds as a seal, a sign that Francis had been conformed completely to the crucified Christ. And this was not a medieval invention. From the very beginning, the Church saw something like it in the martyrs, men and women who endured torture with a strange and steady peace. The fathers even had a word for that interior freedom. The Greek term apatheia did not mean numbness or not caring. It meant freedom from disordered passion, a soul so healed and so anchored in God that fear and panic lost their power. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, on his way to die around the year 110, wrote that he longed to be ground like wheat for Christ. The early Christians did not chase pain. They were caught up in a love that made them oddly free in the face of it. Centuries later, Saint Teresa of Avila described the same thing from the inside, moments of prayer so overwhelming that her body could barely register the world around her. St. Paul had described it first in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, when he wrote of being caught up to the third heaven, so lost in God that he could not tell whether he was in the body or out of it. The Church stays careful here though. The Catechism in paragraph 67 teaches that private experiences like these, however moving, are not part of the deposit of faith. No Catholic is required to believe in any single stigmatic. These are invitations to wonder, never tests of orthodoxy. So what does this mean practically for you today? Here is the heart of it. Catholic theology rests on a principle that sounds simple but changes everything. Grace does not destroy nature, it perfects it. The saints' insensibility was not God switching off their bodies like a machine. It was what happens when a soul is so absorbed in love that the senses fall quiet underneath it. St. Thomas Aquinas explained this centuries before brain scans existed. When the mind is completely drawn upward toward God, he taught, attention is pulled away from the senses below. The Greeks had a word for this state too, ecstasis, ecstasy, which literally means standing outside yourself. Love, Aquinas said, places a person outside himself. So when a mystic in rapture stops feeling pain, that is not a glitch in the system. It is exactly what the system predicts. The theology and the neuroscience are describing the same moment from two different heights. That clears up one of the most common misunderstandings. Many people picture these saints walking around numb, feeling nothing ever. That is simply not true. Most of them suffered enormously. Padre Pio bled from 5 wounds for half a century. The quiet came only in those moments of deep union, like a phone so locked onto one task that every other notification goes silent. The goal was never to escape pain. It was to be so full of God that pain lost its grip. And you do not need the stigmata to live inside this same truth. You can offer a hard day, a sleepless night, a small humiliation, and quietly unite it to Christ. You can sit in silence before Him for a few minutes and let your attention rest on His love instead of your worries. That is the ordinary version of what the saints lived in an extraordinary way. If you are carrying real pain right now, please do not carry it alone. Speak with a trusted priest or spiritual director who can help you bear it well. And if a teaching like this stirs something in you, that is worth holding on to and worth sharing with someone who needs it today. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Many of our Protestant brothers and sisters read that line in Galatians very differently. They would say Paul's marks are simply the scars of a hard life of ministry, the beatings and shipwrecks he endured preaching the gospel, and nothing more. They are often cautious about miraculous signs appearing after the age of the apostles, and that caution comes from a sincere desire to keep Christ alone at the center. That is a fair concern, and we should honor it. Here is the Catholic response, offered with respect. We agree completely that Christ's saving work is finished and perfect. Nothing can be added to it. But St. Paul also writes in his letter to the Colossians, chapter 1, verse 24, that he completes in his own flesh what is lacking in Christ's afflictions for the sake of the church. He does not mean Christ failed. He means Christ invites us to share in his work. The wounds of a saint are never a rival to the cross. They are a reflection of it, a way the one sacrifice of Jesus becomes visible in a human life. Then there is the voice of the honest skeptic who says this is all just brain chemistry. And to that we say, in part, yes. The body really does release its own painkillers under extreme stress. But that explains the silence, not the wounds. When doctors examined Padre Pio, the first to make a formal examination, Dr. Luigi Romanelli reported wounds that showed no signs of infection and were, in his words, not superficial. A professor who was an open unbeliever, Dr. Amico Bignami, examined him as well, and still the wounds went on, decade after decade. Science can describe the feeling. It cannot account for the flesh. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a mystery that does not insult your intelligence. Christ was wounded on the cross. St. Paul bore the marks of Jesus. St. Francis received them in his own body. And in every case, the message is the same, a love strong enough to reshape a human being from the inside out. The saints were not empty, they were full. The pain went quiet because someone greater had taken up all the space. That is not an escape from the cross. It is the cross transfigured by love. So take one small step. Spend 5 quiet minutes in prayer today. Read that verse from Galatians for yourself. Bring your own burdens to confession or to Mass and let them be joined to Christ. You do not need a miracle to belong to Him. You only need to say yes. If this helped you, share it with a friend, subscribe, and check out our web app for daily Catholic resources and soul search. The saints did not feel less because they were broken. They felt less pain because they were filled with more love.